everybody. It is time for the XP Billionaires podcast. Welcome to the show. My name is Rafe Thegrim. I am joined by my hosts, Sky Knight and the Mel Zerker. Sky, how are you doing today?
Oh, I'm good. I'm good. Taking it easy, having some fun.
That's what we hope to bring with this podcast, so I completely welcome it. And Mel, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I've been focusing on a lot of crafts recently, so I'm working on a mini wizard's tower house, which is like 3 inches across, 8 inches deep, and like 10 inches tall. So, anyways, if you want to check it out, you can check it out on my social media. But I've been crafting a lot.
Oh, that's awesome. And a fun fact, by the way, Wizard's Tower is actually the name of a place I once worked at.
What did they sell there?
It was a comic book store.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
It's also where we met.
That's
Aww.
absolutely correct. It is. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a little bit of juicy history for you about my personal self, but and well, some of Sky's personal self too, apparently. So let's say we get into our nice meaty topic today. And when I say topic, I mean today's story time. So this week I thought we'd tell everyone a story. And what we'll do is we're going to discuss that story as we tell it. Now, the story I had in mind is called The Life Cycle of a JRPG Localization. I'll be honest, it's actually a pretty short story, but I think how we react as fans is a quite interesting phenomenon during each chapter of this story. And that's really what I kind of want to get into with this discussion. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So with that said, let us begin with chapter 1.
Ba-ba-bum,
I'm keeping those in just for the record.
You're welcome.
Feel free.
All right. So, a new JRPG has just been announced for release in Japan, and it interests you greatly. The developers have also mentioned a localization after its Japanese release. After that announcement, articles come out detailing the features of the game, character art, story concepts, and more. So like I said, it's a pretty quick chapter. But what I want to know at this stage of the cycle, when it comes to that information, the articles, everything that comes out about the game before its release, how much of that content do you choose to take in? For me, I eat it all for breakfast. I love it. And don't get me wrong, I know what it does to me. It just makes me want the game way sooner. But I love seeing all the details. If there's a trailer, I will watch the hell out of it. I think one of my most obsessive moments was when I first found out about the announcement of Dot Hack GU after having only just recently shortly prior to that time, finishing the original quadrilogy. And that trailer blew my mind. I watched it over and over again. All these elements from the first four with a whole bunch of new characters, seeing this creepy evil kite that blows away the main character whose name I didn't even know yet with a data drain was just amazing. And it showed off one of the coolest scenes, which was actually right at the beginning of the first GU game. Oh, I watched it obsessively. And yes, it just made me want the game more and more and more. I'm not worried necessarily if I get a spoiler. And if the game is a direct sequel that might do that, I am willing to take that risk. But I want to see everything so I can tell other people about it because when I explain it, it's not as good as the articles. So usually people will at least listen, or they'll tell me to shut up when the time comes.
See, I'm very different here. I only go for like the very initial content that's released. Stuff like the very first trailer, just enough to get a sense of what I'm in for. Once I'm pretty sure that whatever this thing is, it's my thing, I stop looking. Because really, in the end, I'd rather play the game and see for myself. I'd also rather go in fairly blind and not be too swayed by the marketing. One way or the other, right? Because we all know that trailers aren't always necessarily representative of the final product. And this is especially the case in situations where it's in a series where, that I'm already into, where I already have a pretty good idea of what sort of thing this is. Like with the Atelier games, for instance, I almost never look at anything more than the very initial content. Oh, look, that's what this new game is called. Here's a couple of new features. Great. I already know I'm going to buy it, so I'm okay with that. I don't need to read anything else. I'm pretty much interested in playing the game as opposed to reading about it in most cases.
And that's fair. I cannot do that. No matter what I try to restrain myself, I always want to keep the hype train going. I want to keep seeing what to expect. That's why I'll look at all of the new content for your stuff for you, because I can keep the hype train going on my own behalf by telling you itsy bitsy tidbits about it as I go.
Yes. I keep you as a buffer between me and the information. I'm one of those people who gets very frustrated by hype a lot of the time because I don't like to set myself up for disappointment. And maybe I'm just less excitable. I don't know. But yeah, I usually like to keep a little bit of distance.
Oh, fair enough. I mean, whatever works best for you. All right, Mel, how much content do you take in?
So I guess I'm like sort of in the middle. So generally speaking, I don't tend to feel spoiled on things. Like even if I know an ending to a story, usually it just allows me to kind of see the direction it's taking, see the hints that the writers have put in there. And I find it sometimes even more enjoyable. I definitely had games where like I need to know if a character lives or dies, for example, and like if I know one way or the other, I can engage more fully in the game. But like sometimes that nebulous space is just really hard for me. So I don't mind spoilers. I like watching a lot of that stuff. I like seeing the new videos. I like getting excited about them. The one exception is if it's a game that's been delayed a lot, because then it just keeps breaking my heart. So if you tell me it'll be out in a year, I can deal with it. But if it keeps getting delayed and I'm like 3 years in, it just hurts my heart too much.
I completely understand that. Like when I saw that trailer for Dot Hack GU, like that was my thing. It was over a year before that game came out, and this was before there was major like delays in game releases. This wasn't like a big thing that was happening way back when. And if it wasn't being announced because the internet wasn't that big of a hype train as of yet. It was getting close, but it just hadn't made it at that point. And I just wanted to keep going and knowing, but that long wait, like it kept hurting every time I went back to that trailer.
Yeah, I get that. Like, I love that game series, and like, thankfully, I didn't get into it until after they'd all come out. Which is the best case scenario is when you're just like, oh, all the stuff is ready for me. But yeah, I remember like I saw the trailer for like the earliest trailer for Horizon Zero Dawn back in the day. And I swear it was like 6 years of like people being like, oh, you mean this game? And I'm like, no, it's called Horizon Zero Dawn. I know it. And they're like, oh, but it's about robot dinosaurs, isn't it this one? Like, and I'm like, no, it's not that one either. It's Horizon Zero Dawn. It's gonna come, and I'm gonna love it. And then I did, so that was good.
Yeah, that's the ideal scenario, really, because after you wait a really long time, it really sucks to have that moment of disappointment if the game isn't what you wanted or what you thought you were gonna get.
Well, I mean, if you were like other, people who would just live in denial about how terrible the game is, looking at you, No Man's Sky crowd originally, they, you just that's how you would deal with it.
Yay! Denial is so helpful.
Like, see, and I went immediately to No Man's Sky too because when it came out, I loved it. I thought it was a great game, and then people were just tearing it apart, and I was like, guys, this is what did you think it was gonna be?
There's a whole controversy about that, but I mean,
Yeah.
it has gotten way better now, and that's all well and good. But yeah, it definitely was not as advertised upon release. That's all I can say.
This is one of the reasons why, I try not to get too hyped, because there are many, many cases of developers promising things that they weren't able to deliver on. Looking at you, Peter Molyneux. It's just like, some people just, in the marketing slash hype stage, some people just need to keep their mouths shut and don't. So it's just like everything before the game comes out, for me, it's a grain of salt. I take it with a grain of salt, because you never know.
Yeah, and there's this sort of like thing that happens in a lot of like advertisement where people will say it's just like this game, but this. And I feel like that does such a disservice to those new games because then you're just imagining what that is. And so many of those really great games have a very different feeling depending on who you are and what you love about it. So saying like this is a great game and I mean it's because it's a great shooter and you mean because it's a sandbox game, like those are totally different angles of what makes it great. So maybe don't compare it to another game.
Or at the very least, say what it resembles from another game, Like, oh, well, the shooting is like in Mass Effect, or, something like that. Like isolate the elements when you're
Yeah.
doing comparisons. Don't just broad stroke it.
Yeah, don't just throw down all the genre or the jargon and expect that to work for you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely not. All right. Well, that's chapter 1. It's time for chapter 2.
Dun, 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 dun.
Okay, you guys are gonna redo our theme song someday.
Just like together back and forth.
Yep. All right. So chapter 2. After all the articles and waiting, the game finally releases in Japan, and it's only a mere couple of months before the Western release. It doesn't take long for people to have gotten their hands on the game. They're showing it off online. And unless you have a fluency in Japanese, it's actually really hard to follow any of the story. So you just focus more on the gameplay and the visuals. So, with the game nearing its Western release and all the new information that's been made available, is this information enough for you to consider pre ordering? What is it that you look for to influence that decision? I mean, for me, considering I've done all my homework, if I want it, I'm going to pre order it. I'll watch some of the gameplay videos, and the only thing that might deter me from getting it right away is if, say, the combat style doesn't quite jive with me, or if there's a major unannounced change to the gameplay that's happened that I wasn't expecting. So, for example, one of the things I'm not a big fan of is first-person dungeon exploration. So, if that's a key component in the game, that's going to deter whether or not I pick it up because it's very, very rare when I enjoy something like that.
I mean, I think that makes sense, right? Like having a better sense, like if you've been sort of gaming long enough, you sort of know what things push your buttons and which things are kind of like, well, I liked it, but only this one game.
Well, yeah, and sometimes you can tolerate something that you wouldn't normally go for if there are other elements about it that you like. Like if the story is amazing, or, like the things that you don't like, say, about person dungeon crawling are mitigated somewhat. I will often do the same because I'm, one of the genres I'm really leery about really is action RPGs generally, because I don't have reflexes. My reflexes are garbage. And so if it's super hard or complicated, or it's just too many things to juggle, I'm not going to be able to play it. So I need to wait. I need to hear reviews. I need to talk to people about it to see if I can even actually play it successfully and not get stuck like an hour into the game.
And you're in a good position too, because I'm okay with action RPGs. I mean, I'm not great at them, but I can handle them in a lot of situations. So at the very least, if it is story that you're interested in, it's a situation where you can at least get the story out of it if I'm enjoying it too.
Well, yeah, exactly. That's a side benefit of having a partner who also does gaming.
Very, very helpful. Sky, what are your thoughts on this?
So, chances are, if I've already made the call if I want the game or not before the Western release is even announced. If I hear about a game before the announcement of a Western release, especially if it's part of an existing series that part of which is already out in English, I will, I'll be going like, okay, is this something I want? Yeah, it's probably something I want. So I always pre-order if I intend to get the game at launch, especially since a lot of the games I'm interested in don't tend to have large print runs, and so can be harder to find later. And also to ensure that I get my copy because limited print runs, and that I don't forget about it because I'm terrible with numbers and therefore I am terrible at remembering dates.
That's completely fair. I mean, at the very least, if you find out eventually that it's not your thing, you can always cancel the pre-order. So you're just ensuring that because you're more likely picking up a niche title, that you get a copy if you want it.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I try to make sure it is something I want before before I make a pre-order. Like, I really don't want to waste a store's time. Yeah, I mean, I will cancel a pre-order if I hear something later down the line I wasn't expecting. Like, if it turns out it's a horror game and it didn't initially look like one, for example, I would cancel a pre-order. But otherwise, yeah, I will either pre-order or I will just wait and see and take the chance.
Yeah. All right, Mel, what are your thoughts?
So I probably would have pre-ordered it as soon as it became an option for me. Like by the time I've already seen what it looks like and I'm excited, I'm pretty quick to commit to that. Um, I feel like I've had pretty few instances where I feel really burned by a game. Sometimes I don't finish it, but usually I've played it to enough of an extent that I got some enjoyment out of it. Like Octopath Traveler, I still haven't finished it, but I enjoyed playing it when I was, and maybe I'll go back to it sometime. So I'm like Sky said, like it's nice to support a company and be like, yeah, I'm in. Let's do it together. As far as like canceling a pre-order, the only time I have done it is when the company says some sketchy stuff. Maybe they've been a little transphobic or something, and I'm like, nope, I don't want to support you anymore, and I just opt out of the experience for that.
Yeah, that's completely fair. Sometimes when a company has done some sketchy stuff, I will either not do it or I will pick it up. If it's a big enough company and that they have physical releases, sometimes I will pick them up used. If I don't want to give them my money directly, if I'm still interested, because sometimes you get properties that are re-released by a company who didn't initially develop it. And you're just like, well, I don't want to support you know, this publisher because they suck, but I really like this, want to try this game they're re-releasing, then I'll just buy it used.
Yeah, there is an issue too with like publishers, developers, individuals on teams, right? Like it's a very nuanced mix of kind of what makes it be like, no, not today. Not today, Satan.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've had situations where, I've had games soured for me by hearing what certain people involved in them, I particularly when it comes to writers, I get a little antsy. Like, If I was like, oh, I love this writer's work, I love their writing style, blah, blah, blah. And then you hear about how terrible a person they are, and you're just like, no. But that's because I care about story.
Yeah, it's like you wrote a friend of mine. How can you be terrible? It happens in books too, right? The same thing with like, Ender's Game and stuff, right? It's just like, oh, why? Why did you have to be like this?
Exactly.
All right. So, final chapter, chapter 3.
Bom, ba, bom, bom, ba, bom, bom, bom.
Dun, 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 dun.
So, Random and Superman. All right, awesome.
I have no answers.
That's okay. I had no questions. All righty. So, for chapter 3, the months of waiting are over. The game has finally made it to the West, and your patience has been rewarded. You have the game. It's everything you have been led to believe it is. At this point, the reviews are coming in. And at what point, if at all, would you look at any of the reviews for the game? And what do you look for in those reviews? So, preferably, I'm looking for the good or the bad points, kind of like our quickfire reviews, which are on our website, which you'll get the link for just at the end of the episode. I'll look at some review videos, but typically from trusted sources. And for me, a trusted source is not looking at places like IGN or GameSpot or anything like that. I look at some of the reviews from some of the RPG fans that I've met on Twitter. I prefer these because I find them to be the most honest. Even if they don't like something and I feel like it won't bother me, I can comment and then end up in a pretty reasonable discussion about it. There's no hate, there's no blood, there's no, shaming one another. It's actually having a proper conversation and a debate. And I think that is awesome. For example, I've seen a lot of mixed reviews so far on Final Fantasy VII Remake. And I have been fortunate enough to, make comments about my concerns for it and not have my head torn off for it, which is kind of nice. Now, I haven't played it yet, but right now it wasn't and still isn't on the top of my to-do list. So it's nice being able to see what the expectations are before I go into it in this case.
I think a lot of the initial response is going to be very hype driven and not necessarily the most rational in some cases, because people have a lot of feelings about Final Fantasy VII, and the rose-colored glasses tend to come on, and in the following months we're going to see a lot of cooling of emotions and tempers.
Well, I think it's already happening. Like I remember several people on Twitter who picked up the game. They started the game and they're like, "Oh my God, I am crying right now. This is so amazing. This is all of that." I saw the same person put out the review after having finished the game and being like, "Okay, there are problems with this game." And as much as I can't hide those problems. So here's what they are, and here's why I'm not liking the game as much. I still like the game, but these are the problems with it. I think people are getting more and more willing to explain that.
Which is good, I think, because I'm glad the remake exists, because I think it means people are looking at the concept and story of Final Fantasy VII and even the original to some extent, with fresher eyes, and being able to see things that they didn't necessarily see to start with. So
No,
I think
absolutely.
we're off the tangent again, though.
Yeah, a little bit, little bit, little bit. All right. Well, why don't you let me know what you look for in these reviews?
Well, I usually glance at some reviews from sources I trust, usually written, usually RP Gamer, actually, to be frank. I don't tend to trust a lot of review sources because often I do find a lot of video game reviews fairly superficial. Not all of them by any extent, but they don't always necessarily address things that I would care about. But I do like to read a good review because I'm always curious about how idiosyncratic my experience is compared to other people's. And also to consider what I may not have noticed or experienced about the game that the reviewer might have. So I want a nice, thoughtful review. And I also prefer that the reviewers understand and write for those who are interested in the genre as a whole and understand it. Because there's a big difference between a review written by a person whose passion and interest is in RPGs than someone who only sort of casually plays RPGs occasionally and does a review. There's a difference in experience. There's a wide differential in taste. And sometimes when you read an RPG review by someone whose passion and love isn't in RPGs, they will just hate on things that are just the usual for our RPG fans.
Yeah, like I had a friend who was complaining a while back about basically that turn-based combat exists. Like, why is this a thing? I want to go faster. Why is it like this? And I'm like, because it's a different what? It's just one of many options. So maybe it's not for you, but like turn-based combat is not new. But I guess if you're into like new games and you're following like new media, like I guess that is something you might come across for the first time as an adult.
I suppose. And, I think with turn-based games, there's a fair amount of ableism involved too. Like, sorry, some of us can't do high-speed action games. Those kind of reflexes just aren't physically possible. And, something where you can go at your own pace, which is what turn-based games, for the most part, allow, has definite accessibility benefits to that.
So here's what you do in a situation like that. If somebody complains about turn-based combat, see if they're interested in playing a one-shot D&D section that's fairly combat heavy. Then ask them that question again afterwards.
Well, see, and this is someone who plays D&D, so I think it's just the idea that like the reason I play games is because it speeds up that process. And like they didn't understand what the benefit was to having that digitally. Anyways, it was a very interesting conversation.
I can imagine. All right, so Mel, what do you do when it comes to reviews?
So I'm maybe a bit odd in that I usually only read reviews once I've finished a game. I don't like to so I'm happy to hear about story, about plot, about gameplay, all that stuff. I'll read summaries of the game, that's fine. But when it comes to reviews, I don't want someone telling me that like something I like or something I don't like is wrong. So I almost always leave it to the end. Maybe the one exception is if like, let's say there's a really hard fight. For example, in Persona 5 Royale, they've modified the fight in Haru's dad's dungeon, and it's like almost impossible unless you like look up how to do it. And everybody hates it, right? And like, so in that case, like it's almost a sense of community built from the flaw of that. And I think it comes down to that is what I want is community. I either want to talk about a game that I've already played and that I love, or I want to talk about something I'm struggling with and feel that other people are struggling with it. And that tends to be what I'm looking for in a review, is more of the like, how was it for you personally?
And this is kind of what I was hinting at when I mentioned how idiosyncratic my experience is compared to other people's. Like, is this thing I had a problem with, is that a communal thing? Like, can I go out and go like, oh my god, this fight was so hard, and everyone goes, uh-huh, yep. And then sometimes you're just like, you read a review and go like, what about that one impossible fight? Like, how does that not warrant a mention?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's always it's always very interesting to see what other people think of parts of the experience. Plus, I mean, it's it can sometimes be hard to find other gamers to talk to about the games you're interested in and are playing currently. So,
Like, I tend to either get reviewed to a game through someone or I review a game to them. So there's always this weird in-between stage where you're like, I know someone's going to be able to talk to me about this, but not right at this second.
And that's one of the good things about gaming, especially when it comes to, just being able to share your experiences with others. No two experiences are ever the same. And regardless whether you're playing the same thing, a revamp of it, it doesn't matter. Everything is tailored to your experiences, to your just sense of like how you did with the game and how you interacted with it. There's always going to be that variety, and that's why I love having this community to go into and talk to and share those experiences with one another. So,
well, yeah, exactly.
But all right, so that is going to wrap up the story of the life cycle of a JRPG localization. So let me know what you guys think about it. Do we do anything similar to you guys? Do you guys do anything different? Let me know. You can find me on Twitter at BillionairesXP, or you can find me on Instagram at Rafe Thagrum. Sky, where can everyone find you?
I'm at SkyKnightXP on Twitter and SkyKnight.xp on Instagram.
And Mel, where can everyone find you?
So you can find me on Instagram at Feminist Gamer or on Twitter at FeministGamer3. I also GM a Dungeons & Dragons live stream called Darkness and Dragons. We air every Wednesday at 6:30, and we're also on YouTube and our podcast if you miss it.
Excellent. And for quickfire reviews, the ones that I kind of like, check out our website, xpbillionaires.wordpress.com. You'll be able to see all the games we've played and what we think about them in very short point form. And lastly, check out our monthly newsletter. It's available on our Ko-fi page, coffee.com/xpbillionaires. And if you'd like to leave a donation, please feel free to. If not, share our experience with the rest of the world. Like I said, it's all about community. Help us grow it. That'd be great. All right, so that's it for us this week. And just remember, however long the wait, your chance to keep gaming will always come. We'll see you next week.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.